The Ashvale kingdom had never looked more beautiful than it did that evening. Silver banners hung from every tower, moonflowers lined the marble staircases, and the great hall glowed with hundreds of candles. Tonight, Alpha King Callahan Ashvale would crown his new Luna. The pack had waited months for this moment, and no one dared to imagine anything could go wrong. Callahan stood near his throne, dressed in a black coat trimmed with silver, his expression calm and unreadable, the way it always was in public. He was a strong alpha, respected and feared in equal measure. His word had never been questioned within his own walls, yet if anyone looked closely, they might have noticed the faint tension in his jaw, the way his eyes drifted toward the door more than once, as if some part of him was waiting for someone who was not coming. 3 years ago, on a night much like this one, he had stood before his entire pack and rejected his fated mate. Her name was Wren Sutcliffe. She had been quiet, gentle, and unsure of herself back then, a young woman who had just discovered she was destined to stand beside the most powerful wolf in the kingdom. Callahan had looked at her plain clothes and her trembling hands, and he had called her weak. He said the moon goddess had made a mistake. He said she was unworthy of a crown. Wren had not cried in front of him. She had simply nodded, turned, and walked out of the palace gates without a single word. The pack whispered for weeks afterward, some pitying her, some agreeing with their king's harsh judgment. Then, as time passed, they simply stopped speaking of her at all. Callahan told himself he felt nothing when he thought of that night. He told himself the ache in his chest was only pride, wounded because his mate had been so unimpressive. He told himself many things over 3 years, and eventually, he almost believed them. Now, tonight, he was about to crown Seraphine Vane, the daughter of a powerful allied alpha. Their match had been arranged for the good of the kingdom, a union built on strategy rather than affection. Seraphine was elegant and composed, trained since childhood to carry herself like royalty. She stood at the far end of the hall, dressed in ivory silk, waiting for the ceremony to begin. She did not love Callahan, and he did not love her, but neither of them expected love to matter. A kingdom needed strength and alliances, not sentiment. The pack elders gathered near the throne, and the great bell above the hall began to ring, signaling the start of the coronation. Seraphine took her first step forward, her chin high, her pace steady and practiced. The crowd turned to watch her, a murmur of approval passing through the room. Then the enormous palace doors slammed open. No guard had announced anyone. No herald had called out a name. Yet a woman walked through the doorway, as though she owned the very stones beneath her feet. She wore a gown the color of deep red wine, and upon her head sat a crown that had not existed an hour before, gleaming silver, and set with dark stones that caught the candlelight. It was Wren. The room fell into stunned silence. Every head turned. Seraphine froze mid-step, her hand tightening around the fabric of her gown. Callahan felt his entire body go still, as though the air itself had thickened around him. She was not the same woman who had left 3 years ago. Her back was straight, her steps sure, her gaze steady and unafraid. She walked past the guards, who oddly made no move to stop her, their eyes wide with something close to reverence. She walked past the nobles, who parted for her without being asked. She walked until she stood only a few feet from the throne, facing the king who had once called her unworthy. Callahan's voice broke the silence first, low and controlled, though anger simmered beneath it. He asked her what she thought she was doing, entering his palace uninvited on the night of his coronation. Wren did not flinch. She looked at him the way a queen looks at a subject who has forgotten his place. She told him calmly that she was not here uninvited. She said she had been invited by every pack whose banners now stood outside these walls, packs who had traveled here believing they were attending Seraphine's coronation, when in truth, they had come for something else entirely. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Several of the visiting alphas, wolves from neighboring territories who had long resented Ashvale's dominance over the region, stepped forward. One by one, they inclined their heads toward Wren, not toward the throne, not toward Seraphine, toward her. Callahan's eyes narrowed. He demanded an explanation, his voice sharper now, though something beneath the anger had begun to shift into disbelief. Wren explained, her tone even and unwavering. She said that when he rejected her 3 years ago, He had taken everything she thought she had. Her place in the pack, her sense of belonging, her identity as anyone's mate. But he had not taken her mind, and he had not taken her will. She had left the kingdom that night with nothing but the clothes on her back, and she had spent every day since building something he never thought to watch for. She told him she had traveled to 3 neighboring territories, packs that had once been rivals to Ashvale, packs who had their own grievances against his rule. She had not gone to them as a broken, rejected mate begging for pity. She had gone to them as a woman with a plan, offering alliance, offering strength through unity, offering something Callahan's kingdom had never extended to them, respect as equals. It had taken years of quiet meetings, careful negotiations, and patient trust building, but she had done it. 3 powerful packs had sworn blood oaths to stand behind her, not as a favor, but because she had proven herself capable of leading them towards something better than constant rivalry. And there was more, she said, something Callahan had never known about his own bloodline. The land beneath the Ashvale Palace, the very stones his ancestors had built their throne upon generations ago, had originally belonged to her family's pack. It had been taken through conquest long before either of them were born, buried in old records that most had forgotten existed. Wren had spent months searching through ancient pack law, consulting elders from forgotten territories, and building an undeniable claim. The palace, by the oldest laws still recognized among the wolf packs, was never fully his to give away to anyone. It was hers to reclaim. Callahan stared at her, his mind struggling to catch up with what he was hearing. He wanted to call it impossible, wanted to order his guards to remove her, but the visiting alphas standing behind her did not look like men who had come to watch a bluff unfold. They looked like men who had already pledged their loyalty and were simply waiting to see how their king would respond. Seraphine, still standing frozen halfway across the hall, turned toward her own father, silently pleading for him to intervene, to defend the arrangement that had been planned for months. But her father's expression had changed. He was watching the visiting alphas with calculating eyes, weighing the shifting balance of power in the room. When he finally spoke, it was not in defense of his daughter's coronation. He suggested, quietly but firmly, that perhaps tonight was not the right night to proceed with any ceremony until matters were clarified. Seraphine's face went pale. She understood, faster than anyone expected her to, that she had just been abandoned by her own father in favor of political survival. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. With as much dignity as she could gather, she turned and walked out of the hall, her ivory gown trailing behind her, unnoticed and unmourned by a room that had already forgotten she was ever meant to be crowned that night. Callahan barely registered her leaving. His attention remained fixed on Wren, on the crown resting on her head, on the quiet confidence radiating from a woman he once dismissed as weak. He took a step toward her, his voice lower now, almost private despite the crowd surrounding them. He asked her why. Why come back at all? Why not simply take her new alliances and build a kingdom of her own, far away from him, far from the pain he had caused her? For the first time since she had entered the hall, something softened in Wren's expression, though it was not weakness. It was the calm of someone who had made peace with an old wound long ago. She told him she was not here for revenge, though she understood, if that was what it looked like, she was not here to humiliate him for the sake of humiliation. She was here because the land was rightfully hers to reclaim, and because the packs who had sworn loyalty to her believed the kingdom needed a different kind of leadership, one built on respect rather than judgment passed too quickly. She told him that the girl who once stood trembling before him 3 years ago no longer existed. That girl had been afraid of not being enough, had shrunk under the weight of his rejection, because she had believed, for a long time, that his opinion defined her worth. It had taken her nearly a year of grief and uncertainty to understand that his judgment of her had never been the truth. It had only been his limitation, his failure to see what she carried within herself. Callahan absorbed her words in silence. Around them, the hall remained hushed, every wolf present witnessing something that would be spoken about for generations. The same crowd that had once watched him reject her without protest now watched her stand before him with unshaken authority, and slowly, one by one, they began to kneel. First the visiting alphas, who had already sworn their loyalty, then the elders, who recognized the ancient law she had invoked and understood it could not be denied. Then, hesitantly, members of his own pack, wolves who had followed him without question for years, now bowing before the woman they had once dismissed alongside him. Callahan did not kneel. He could not. Not yet, his pride and his shock still warring within him. But he also did not order anyone to rise. He stood there, king of a palace that was no longer entirely his, watching the quiet, unstoppable strength of the mate he had once thrown away. Ren stepped past him then, toward the throne itself, and turned to face the kneeling hall. She did not sit upon it. Instead, she stood beside it, one hand resting lightly on its carved arm, a silent statement that she had not come to steal his throne outright, only to claim what was rightfully hers, to stand as an equal rather than beneath him. She addressed the room, her voice carrying easily through the silence. She spoke of unity between the packs, of ending old rivalries built on pride rather than reason, of a future where strength was measured, not by fear, but by loyalty freely given. She spoke with the calm authority of someone who had spent 3 years preparing for exactly this moment, and by the time she finished, even those who had come as strangers looked at her as though they already trusted her judgment more than they had ever trusted the crown alone. When the hall finally began to stir again, when whispered conversations replaced the stunned silence, Callahan found himself standing apart from it all, watching the woman who had walked in uninvited and left as the undeniable center of power in his own home. He did not know, in that moment, whether what he felt was anger, humiliation, or something far more complicated, something that had been buried beneath years of denial. Ren did not seek him out again that night. She did not ask for his apology, and she did not offer forgiveness he had not earned. She simply took her place among the allied alphas, speaking quietly with them about the future, about the kind of kingdom they intended to build together, one where old wounds might finally be allowed to heal, though not in the way anyone had expected when the evening began. As the candles burned lower and the hall slowly emptied, Callahan remained near his throne, alone with his thoughts for the first time in years. He thought of the trembling girl he had rejected, and the composed, powerful Luna who had returned in her place. He understood, perhaps for the first time fully, that the crown had already changed hands long before tonight, shaped quietly and patiently, while he had been too blind, too certain of his own judgment, to notice. And as he watched Ren across the emptying hall, speaking with calm confidence to wolves who had once been strangers, he realized that whatever happened between them next, one truth remained unshaken. She had never needed his crown to become who she was meant to be. She had only needed the chance to prove it, and tonight, in front of everyone who once doubted her, she finally had.